people in the preschool didn't know our story. They didn't, and they would call me mom, or to, say to the kids, your mom's here, and so one day I just said to Sean, I said, what do you want me to do when people call me your mom? And he said, sorry, this always gets me. He said, tell them our old mommy's in heaven and you're our new mom. And that was how he made sense of it in his head, that he had old, and to this day they call Maria old mommy. And so, I mean, that little child set that framework then, which helped me enormously.
Welcome to And Then Everything Changed, a podcast about the pivotal moments in life and decisions that define us. I'm your host, Ronit Plank. Today, my guest is Jacqueline Genovese. She is also my friend. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Ronit. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm so proud of you for your podcast and now your newsletter and your book. You're amazing.
Oh, thank you. You're amazing. And I mean, you are really amazing. And I think right before we started recording, you said that you have students who will approach you and ask how they can do what you do. And you said, it's a weird thing that you do. And so I think, can you, in your own words, just explain what is your elevator pitch for what you do?
Well, my work is in the medical humanities, and it's at the intersection of military and medicine, which seems like a strange thing, but basically on the medical side, what we do is help medical students and physicians basically hold on to their humanity as they go through what can often be a very inhumane process, either medical training, medical education, or as we're seeing today, front lines of the pandemic. And on the military side, there are many similarities between military and medicine: hierarchy, life and death situations, minority of the population. In both sets, it's less than 1% of the entire population. And also there is a very distinct masculine culture of, emotion is a weakness. Talking about the issues is not promoted. And so in both areas, our program helps both physicians and veterans write and process some of the more challenging experiences that they've had.
Mm-hmm. And was this program, like where and when was the inception of this program?
Well, the Stanford program started, 15 years ago as the faculty director is Dr. Audrey Schaefer. She's an anesthesiologist at the Palo Alto VA, and she's also a poet and a writer. And she recognized a need for this, a while ago. So she actually started this in her living room, where she had medical students come, read their creative writing, sing, perform. And that little seed has really grown into this amazing, Stanford's mascot is a tree, so I will say tree.
That's very good branding, Jacqueline.
For the program as it stands today, which is, she was able to hire me as a full-time executive director, and I was able to hire a part-time program coordinator, and we have a part-time lecturer for creative writing and storytelling, and a series of affiliated faculty. So the programming and the academic offerings have really grown over the last 5 years. And the beauty of Dr. Schaefer working at the VA, she too has a special place in her heart for veterans. So when I got to Stanford, I told her I would love to create a war literature and writing class for the military affiliated students at Stanford. And she gave me her blessing, and I was able to write a grant to get money, because I like to feed my students and also buy their supplies, because particularly veterans coming in are often at a different financial situation than most of the other students.
And from your, you've been there for how long now in this capacity?
7 years. It's hard to
Wow.
believe. Yes.
Yes. And the people that come in, the veterans that come in, how many of them would you say had experience writing prior to your class or your lecture?
Well, here is the amazing thing about military affiliated students. They have to be expert communicators, particularly in combat, right? Because if there's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, people's lives are on the line. So I am always so impressed and amazed at how great they write, even though they think that they're not writers and they think that they're not good writers. And so we do timed writing prompts in class and also a final assignment. And 2 of my students have been published in outside publications. And my lofty goal would be at the end of each class to actually produce a publication with everybody's writing. But so I would say for them, they don't think they have the writing. And also I make it's not a requirement. That's in the class description, no previous writing experience necessary. So I would say, if anything, they don't know how good they are in terms of that.
And how is that experience for you when you're listening to what they have to write and when you're listening to the experiences they share? You yourself are a writer, and you have a lot of different experiences, which we're going to get into. But how is it to be helming a class where what they're writing about can be really complicated and difficult?
Yeah, that's a great question. The class guidelines are confidentiality, collegiality, compassion, and cussing is okay. Those are my guidelines. And so the idea that to get students comfortable sharing some of the more difficult situations, there's that basis of trust and understanding. And the idea too, especially with timed writing, punctuation doesn't matter, spelling doesn't matter, just get the thoughts out on the paper. And it's just a really freeing exercise. And once students start to share, then they trust each other, they trust the process. And I make them handwrite because, the physiology of handwriting is different in terms of how your brain is engaged than typing on a keyboard. And they kind of make fun of me, but they do it. And when we meet in person, I would provide them an actual journal and pen to do that with. But in terms of the writing, what we do in class is a response, typically like in a writing workshop, what works well, what you want to hear more of. And then in the longer assignments is when I'm able to give more editorial feedback and some ideas for them if they want to take the piece further. So it's really just an amazing learning, collective learning experience for all of us, because for me in particular, I am not a veteran. So a lot of times I am learning about a military process and they're super great at explaining everything to me in terms of, especially if it's heavy on acronyms. So it's really a mutually learning experience. And I typically have students from different services, which is also so much fun because they just rib each other constantly.
Well, I was just going to ask you, I was going to say, being, watching this workshop experience, this type of platform there versus being in a writing workshop for, let's say, a whole bunch of lay people who are writers, what is the biggest difference in the feedback they give each other and the type of interactions they have? Is there a real big difference between a military writing group and a non-military writing group?
Well, I would say yes, in the sense that this particular writing group is really not so much about the writing itself. I mean, it is, but it's about the sharing of the experience. And even if they're from different services, they have similar, either positive or negative experiences. And we do humor too. We always have, because that's one thing they say they miss the sense of humor in the military, which can be dark, but it can also be hilarious. And so it's really more about creating community through the sharing of the stories, as opposed to like what we have gone through with a workshop, really honing in on the writing itself. I mean, that does come later, more individually, but and also just to get people used to writing, and used to writing in a timed manner, and being comfortable with that. Because my hope and dream for them and the medical students and the doctors is for them to have a daily habit of journaling or writing, or even just turning to pen and paper or the keyboard when they need to process something particularly difficult.
Is it ever hard for you to be a witness to some of the stories and the conversations?
Well, I hear some really difficult things, particularly from the veterans, but I think, I mean, part of the reason I got into this work, one of my friend's sons had done 3 tours in Afghanistan, and then he came home and committed suicide. And so as I was looking into the whole issue of military suicide, and I'm thinking about these young men, and they're my son's ages. And so I think for me, because, and they all tell me I put off a mom vibe, so I think for me, I'm more there to be present for them, and then listening I'm more as a mom thinking, oh my gosh, this is someone's child who went through this experience. So in the moment, I'm supportive and may ask a few questions, or validate their experience and validate the fact that what they went through was horrific. And there's, sometimes palpable relief in that, and being able to just have them say what happened, and then have people agree, yeah, that was horrible.
Maybe it's a little like bearing witness.
Yes, absolutely. But it's a very, and not to be super spiritual, but it is. I feel like I'm trying to be in service of something greater toward healing.
And you said that you weren't in the military yourself, so beyond your friend whose son committed suicide after the 3 tours in Afghanistan, what else brought you to working with veterans?
Well, my father was actually a Navy veteran during the Korean War, and he went to college on the GI Bill. And I had aspirations of going to the Naval Academy because it was free, and not only free, but they pay you per month, and then the students typically have enough money to buy a new car when they graduate. So when I was in high school, that was very appealing. But then when I went for my medical physical, they found 2 small things that are wrong with my heart. So that kept me out of the Naval Academy. So I did have an interest in that early on. And my sister joined the Navy, and she was in the Navy and did anti-submarine warfare, and went all over the world. So I obviously, I wouldn't say I grew up in a military family, although my father did work for the Navy as a civilian. He actually worked for the chief of the Navy. I can't remember what the title is. So it was just sort of there, present in my upbringing. So I wasn't completely unfamiliar with it. Some of the best books I've read have had to do with war. And so that is the sort of the convergence of those interests. And then, like I said, it was a very personal, compelling thing for me in the beginning. And then as I got more into it and looked into the physiology of the brain and what happens to soldiers exposed to multiple IED blasts, and how traumatic brain injury contributes to post-traumatic stress. And so it led me into onto the medical side of what was happening.
And you and I have spoken in other conversations about the toll on medical students and doctors as well, and what kind of stress they endure because of what they do.
Absolutely, yes. And my window into that in particular began even before I discovered this field. We sadly in my family have a family oncologist because I have two sisters and my mother all died of cancer. And the same wonderful physician treated all of them. And as I saw what he went through, and the toll it took on him, it just opened a window for me into understanding, oh my goodness, how difficult must this be for physicians, particularly oncologists, as they try to, hold back the wave of cancer with chemo and radiation, with, these different tools. Nothing's perfect. Cancer, I don't know. The Emperor of All Maladies is a great book about cancer and how it is just a mystery and, continues to be a mystery, that we've made progress, but it is still a medical challenge. And so having that personal experience with Dr. Haggerty, then when I got into my medical humanities coursework, I had a much better, I think, foundation for empathy for the physicians than a lot of folks. We often hear that physicians need to have more empathy for patients, and that is true. But in my experience, the opposite is also true, because they are people under their white coats. They are not Superman or Superwoman, or I guess Wonder Woman. And they're experiencing life and death, and they're seeing people at the worst of times, except for in childbirth, and that's can be mostly in the best of times. But so that early personal experience really informed sort of how I developed the course I do at Stanford for the physicians, which is called Literature and Medicine. And when we could meet in person, again, it was a dinner and discussion series where we would have dinner. We would read a curated syllabus, basically, that I put together of poetry, short stories, essays, but as a catalyst for conversation around the challenges and the rewards as well of being physicians.
I'm thinking about this journey of you witnessing Dr. Haggerty and what Dr. Haggerty went through, and I'm trying to place this in time. So, because how old were you? When did this feeling of empathy for the doctor and noticing the toll it took on him? When did that strike you? How old were you?
Well, I was actually 25 when I first met Dr. Haggerty, but honestly, the empathy piece, and I was quite frankly angry that he couldn't cure my sister, and she died at 33. And so the empathy didn't kick in until my mother, who got sick after. And then seeing the wear and tear on him, and seeing that how he felt about our family, and our family having to go through that again. I tell the story, one night at the hospital, I got into the elevator, and he typically was never a hair out of place, clean white coat, very neatly dressed, very professional. And he was in the elevator just slumped to the side, all disheveled, and his briefcase was full of like medical journals. And I was like, and it was super late. At that point, I was staying overnight in the hospital. And I said, "Oh my gosh, you're still here." And he just let this big sigh out, and it just really, that image of him just really stuck with me, because he basically said, "My day's not over," and he kind of lifted up his briefcase full of it wasn't shut, because I could see what he was reading, and this was, before most everything was on the internet. So right after that, in fact, I got a position at a medical school in Texas, partially because of this experience, to want to sort of be on the front end of research related to cancer, and also just sort of understanding to better understand how the medical system worked and clinical trials and all of that. So, and that particular medical school had the medical humanities program that I was then able to pursue while I was working full time.
And you mentioned that you've lost two sisters and a mother to cancer. And how many siblings in your whole family were there?
There are 8 of us, 6 girls and 2 boys. And so Maria was my oldest sister, and Natalie was the 3rd oldest. So I have already outlived 2 of my sisters, both older.
Can you talk a little bit about I guess I'm trying to remember your children are which sister's biological children?
So that was my sister Maria. She was the oldest. And in terms of our relationship, it was pretty funny because she was the oldest and I was the youngest. And we were complete opposites because I was a little bit of a troublemaker and a tomboy. And she was straight A student, never got in trouble. We even look completely different. She has like strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes, and I'm darker skin, dark hair, and all I ever wanted to do was be outside. And but she, for some reason, I think to try to protect me, she just took me, under her wing out of all of the siblings. And one day I was playing at the creek, and she came to get me for dinner, and I didn't want to go home. I was like 7, and there was a tree that had fallen across the creek. And so I was like, oh, I'll just run away because she won't follow me because she can't swim and she's terrified of water. And so this is going to make me cry. But I jumped on the tree and I ran across, but I fell in the creek, and it was so cold, and I was like flailing around, and all of a sudden I heard her call my name, and she had actually run on the tree and laid down and was holding her hand out for me to grab. And at that moment, I was young, but I was like, oh my goodness, she wanted to help me more than she was afraid of the water, which was amazing to me. And so from that point on, we just sort of had this special bond. And so when I was with her for the cancer diagnosis, which was stage 4 when she found out,
And how old was she at that point?
She was 31.
She was 31 when she first got diagnosed. She was already stage 4?
Yes. It had spread that rapidly because Kristen was only 6 months old at the time. And as we know about breast cancer, sometimes higher levels of estrogen help accelerate breast cancer. And obviously when you're pregnant, you have a higher level of estrogen. And so Kristen was 6 months at the diagnosis, and Sean was 2.
And these are Maria's children.
Right. And so at that point with the diagnosis, all I could think of was her pulling me from that creek.
And when you two were there at the diagnosis, did it take a while for the impact to really hit?
Oh, for the stage 4, yeah, because we immediately went into, okay, how can we fix this mode? And at the time, I was actually living in San Diego, and was there just seemed to be more. This was 1987, so there were more experimental type treatments, and I tried to get her in with a specialist at UCLA. She was still in Maryland. So no, quite frankly, in the beginning, I think I'm not sure that we were necessarily in denial, but it was more like, well, this can't happen, so we're going to fix it. It was more that type of situation. And the initial plan actually was for her to bring Sean and Kristen and move to San Diego and stay with us, because she was still working at the time and she was a single mom supporting these children.
Oh, she was a single mom. I didn't realize that.
Well, she was divorced. So,
Okay.
yeah. And so that was the plan. And she came out the February after she, let's see, was, so she, 2 years. So it was a year and a half after diagnosis, and things were looking better. She was on tamoxifen. So she came out to San Diego with the kids to do like a trial run, and loved San Diego, met all of her friends. And so the plan was then for her to go back, sell her house, wrap things up, and then move out with the kids, and then we'd all be together. But sadly, she didn't make it out to San Diego because the cancer spread to her liver and then eventually her brain. And so I was back for that, and then I came back out to San Diego with Sean and Kristen, and my mom came out to help for the first 6 months or so, thank goodness. And yeah, so it wasn't really, even up until that February. She died in July, and the February before, things were looking up and things were looking good. And they didn't use the word remission, but they thought they had gotten it all. And so that sadly is the story of cancer often.
So she was making plans, and she was back, like fixing up her life in Maryland so that she could come out to San Diego, start her new life. And this part of the story where her children came out to San Diego to live with you is something I want to kind of slow down and look at a little bit closer. So when she wasn't doing well, and she realized that things weren't going to have a good outcome, how is it that she made the decision about her children that, with you?
That's a great question, because everyone in the family was like, what? She can't cook. Her house is a mess. She lives clear across country.
So when she was sick, you guys, it sounds like you were in the fight against cancer, and that was consuming. It was good, positive power. Let's kill this thing. But then things took a turn. And so what did the family understand were her plans for her kids before she announced what would happen? What did people think would happen to the children? Would they go with their dad, or, did your mom want to raise them?
I believe that they assumed that my parents would raise them, but that was not an ideal situation. So Maria knew what she wanted for the kids, and she knew, sort of half jokingly, because she poor thing, she could not play sports. She couldn't, and she wanted to so badly. And she wanted her kids. She basically said, I don't want them to ever be picked last for a team. On the school playground back in the day when you would pick teams, and sort of half jokingly, but she knew with me that they would just have a different kind of upbringing in terms of sports, in terms of education, in terms of adventure. And so that was something that she wanted for them. And she also gave me permission to not listen to anybody. She said, everyone's going to give you advice. You just follow your heart and you'll know what's right. And that has helped me so much through the years, her confidence in me with that.
Were you scared when she told you that she wanted you to raise them?
It's so funny. I think I was like so young and so wanting.
24, right?
Yeah, 25. I was 25.
25.
So young and just so wanting her not to worry. And also probably too young to know what I didn't know as well.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say that I was scared. I just was more about hoping that she could go in peace, knowing that the children would be loved. and taken care of. And so I can't say that I was scared, because I feel like even in the process of the cancer and dealing with her physician, I really kind of grew up a lot during that process as well. Just facing things that, I mean, meeting with the lawyers, just all of that, things that, typically when you're 23, 24, 25, you're not necessarily doing.
And there's also that idea, I don't know what you had faced as a family or individually prior to this happening, but I feel like there are these moments in our lives and these things that happen that make us grow up really fast, or it's sort of that coming of age and that realizing that things are actually a lot harder in many cases than we had known before. And I feel like, I don't know if this was one of the earlier experiences you had of like kind of growing up and realizing that things don't turn out.
Right. Even especially for somebody like Maria, who did everything right and, followed all the rules, and was you know, Phi Beta Kappa honor student, all of that, all of those things that, and just a super wonderful, amazing person. And yes, this idea that things are random and things happen. Although we were, my parents are first generation children of immigrants, and so we also grew up hearing stories of difficulty that my grandparents and parents faced because of being Sicilian. And so it wasn't ever that struggle was not part of the story. It was just for somebody so young, and just having had a baby.
By the time your other sister Natalie and your mother had cancer, was your reaction any different, or did anything change within you during those illnesses?
I was more able to be in conversation with Dr. Haggerty about treatments and about alternatives, and also a better understanding of hospice, which with my sister Maria, we fought against hospice a little bit. We were just like, no, because that's like giving up. And so having gone through that process and kind of understanding the benefits of that particular palliative care route, that definitely changed. But it still kicks you in the gut, no matter what, in terms of the way people die from cancer.
How do you think it was for your mom to lose her two daughters and then to get sick with it herself?
Well, I don't know if it's fortunately, but fortunately my second sister died after my mom died. So, but I do know my mother just said, this isn't right. Parents are not supposed to bury their children. And Maria was her first, and oldest. Yeah. And I honestly think if it weren't for the kids, for all of us, Sean and Kristen gave us, reason to move on and to live as fully as possible for them, but also for my sister who couldn't. So, and my mom did some adventurous things, like she came to Italy with me, which I'm not sure she would have done before. This was before she got sick, and came to the ocean, and the ocean waves made her dizzy, but she did some fun stuff with us out in San Diego. So I do think having Sean and Kristen's lives in our hearts and in our hands, and needing to do the best for them, really was a great sort of rallying factor for all of us.
Yeah, and for someone who hasn't been through this but has heard the story, and I've heard it before a little bit, but it's interesting for me because I used to really get stuck on that part of, wow, what is it like to have your aunt raise you as her own. But now I don't know if I've gotten older or I just have, like, I'm not, there's nothing, it's like, of course, right? Like, I don't know. It used to, the story, I would wonder what it was like for Kristen and Sean to have you as their mom and their aunt. And I'm still curious about that. And I'm still curious what that kind of melding of different relationships is like for you. But I also really see how you are their mom.
Yeah, Sean actually was a huge help in this at the tender age of 4, because of course, I was Aunt Jackie at the time. And so when they came to live with us in San Diego and started preschool where I worked at the University of San Diego, and they were fabulous. They were amazing and supportive, and they had just opened a preschool on campus, and so I was able to get both of the kids in. And so of course people in the preschool didn't know our story. They didn't, and they would call me mom, or to say to the kids, your mom's here. And so one day I just said to Sean, I said, what do you want me to do when people call me your mom? And he said, sorry, this always gets me. He said, tell them our old mommy's in heaven and you're our new mom. And that was how he made sense of it in his head, that he had old, and to this day they call Maria old mommy. And so, I mean, that little child set that framework then, which helped me enormously. And I think that was how he made sense of it. They say children are closest to God, and I really believe that, and that was perfect example of it. So, yeah, in terms of that. And then one day after that, I got to the preschool, and he was on the other side of the room playing, and he looked up and he just said, Mom, and he came running toward me and hugged me. And so that day it just switched, and I went from being Aunt Jackie to mom. Oh. So I give the kids all the credit for that, because Sean came up with that, framework, and it was super amazing and just wise beyond his years.
Yeah. And you have 3 children.
Right. So 5 years later, after becoming a mom, then I gave birth to Troy, the youngest. And what was hysterical about that was I had never had a newborn, right? But many people that knew me didn't know that. They did, they didn't know the whole story. And so when I was having difficulty, a couple of my girlfriends were like, well, what'd you do with Sean and Kristen? Like, why is this such a big deal? And so it was pretty funny. So, having a newborn obviously is very different than a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So there was definitely a learning curve, and he was an emergency C-section. And so there was a recovery process, and it was quite the adventure. And it was tough in the beginning because Sean said, so Sean was 8 when Troy was born, 8 or 9, and he said, I wish he had been a girl, because then I'd still be the only boy. And then he said, things are never going to be the same. And but fast forward to how many years later, and Troy was Sean's best man at his wedding, and the 3 of them are just thick as thieves. They're just adorable to watch. And but yeah, it was a little rough going, even just for me physically, in that. And again, my mom came out, thank goodness, to help with all of that transition.
All these years later, so many years later, and they're launched. I mean, those kids are totally launched, right? They're in their 30s and a little bit younger, right?
Yeah, Sean's a dad himself. He's married and has his little literal mini-me Declan looks just like, I got them copy and paste t-shirts for Father's Day because they look so alike.
So cute. Do you ever, so I wonder what it's like all these years later. Is it, do you ever pause still when you think about them as your children, or is it so what the story is now that you never even have to do that mental little, there's no mental hiccup that, oh, well, they were Maria's first?
People would say to me, well, when are you going to have one of your own? And I never understood that, because I was like, well, these are my own. I always have felt like Maria and I co-mothered the kids, because, man, I prayed to her a lot through the years. And so it was never that they weren't in my heart in that way. And so the only thing I thought about when Declan was born was that, Maria wouldn't have a chance to see him, her and future grandchildren. But she, she's always been part of our conversations, and growing up we had a huge collage of pictures of her and her with them, and the kids would say, did old mommy like the Redskins, or did old mommy like Kentucky Fried Chicken, as we would go through our daily whatever it is that we were doing.
Was that something that you welcomed, or did that ever get hard for you?
Oh, well, those kinds of questions were great. The tougher questions were, can we fly to heaven and cut mommy's cancer out and bring her back home? When they were really little, those were some really tough conversations. And then at her funeral, Sean said, why is everybody crying? It's not mommy's fault, and just the viewpoint of a child. And I had actually sought great advice from a child psychiatrist in terms of, don't say she went to sleep, don't say she's going on a trip, all of those things, because that implies them coming back, because, children don't necessarily understand the concreteness of death. And he said, yes, bring them to the funeral. They may not understand it at that time, but as they get older and look back, they'll understand, and it'll be a closure. So I was really thankful for that advice, early on in terms of that.
And, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask, and of course you don't have to answer this, but about your husband, because you're no longer with him, and he was there for part of their, or all of their childhood. Is that right?
Yes. So we were married for 23 years, and it got harder over time. And so the good news is it was an amicable divorce, and the kids feel like everybody is sort of better off in terms of stress level and anxiety. Actually, when it first happened, my youngest was in high school, and he said, Mom, you're much less of a smother mother. And and I think that was just a good point of him experiencing me more relaxed and less anxious. So yes, but he was there, and he said yes as well in the beginning, and I give him a lot of credit for that. It just got really tougher over time.
Yeah. So these days you work with people who have been in really difficult situations when you teach this class, and you work with people in the medical field who are in really difficult situations, and you overcame lots of family difficulty in terms of health and loss. So what keeps you going?
Honestly, the energy created when in a room, or now on Zoom, when people are able to feel that their experiences they're not alone in their experience, either hearing it from colleagues. I typically, particularly in the medical setting, I always give my background, since I'm not an MD, so they understand where I'm coming from. Same with the military. And honestly, and the feedback that I have received from people, some of the younger physicians say that the reason they stayed at Stanford was because of the class and because they were able to build community. And so really it's being able to do this amazing work. And I don't even like to call it work because it's really, I feel very fortunate to be in a position to provide space for people to hold on to humanities and the arts. I mean, it's amazing the number of physicians who are also musicians, that they took music lessons. There's learning music and learning medicine is the executive function of the brain. So there's just a lot of similarities. So during COVID, we've had these, we call them stuck at home concerts. And so we have people playing music at home, physicians, medical students, their families. And it's just been, because we were supposed to have this big symphony with 44 physicians ready to go right before COVID. So, and that the programs, the classes, the activities that we do are beneficial, and people are so grateful, and they tell us, and they tell the dean, and they tell other people how grateful they are for that permission and time and space to decompress and to be back in touch with their creative side. One of the physicians said, I forgot how beautiful words can be. Because medical language is medical language, right? It's not the language of poetry or the language of literature. And so that is really I'm energized every time I come off of anything, a call or a concert. It's just energizing in and of itself.
And I think that your perspective on physicians and what they go through, I think for a lot of people, that people would understand what veterans have gone through and how difficult and often traumatic their experience has been. But I really think until I talked to you, I hadn't considered what physicians go through. So is there something you think most people should keep in mind when, something you'd like them to know, the average layperson like me, about veterans and physicians that we can keep in mind to help us understand better?
Sure. One of the things I talk about is how we put both professions sort of on a pedestal, and we have a lot of times unrealistic expectations. Like for myself, Dr. Haggerty, I was so mad at him for not curing Maria, but we put them on a bit of a pedestal, and then when they fail, actually one of the surgeons says, we're either a hero or a zero, like there's no in between. And so I think understanding, and they themselves are their worst critics, and they have such high expectations of themselves, and and they're in a system that is not exactly, even though it's a system of healing, it can be very dehumanizing and crushing. And so just remembering that they are human beings underneath the white coat, and that they have children, and that they have grandmothers who have COVID, and, just understanding and asking them, how are you doing? And thanking them. I mean, it's so funny how many doctors tell me they're so grateful when they get a note, or someone says, well, how are you, doc? And then for the veterans, I will say, on their behalf, they don't particularly like thank you for your service, because as one student said, what do you say to, that's not a conversation, that's just, what do you say? You're welcome. And so if you're in a position where you're able to have a longer conversation with the vet, say, how was it? Where were you stationed? What motivated you to join that particular branch? Just to have it be more of a conversation as opposed to a sentiment.
It's like open-ended. There's room for them, right? To kind of tell you who they are.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did you ever talk to Dr. Haggerty again, or did you ever reach any kind of resolution or closure with Dr. Haggerty emotionally?
Oh, absolutely. So when my sister Natalie was diagnosed, so that was after Maria and Mom, and the first time I saw him, he said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but I hoped I'd never see you again." And I said, "Me too, Dr. Haggerty, believe me." But and he just looked at me. He had the half glasses, and he just kind of looked at me over his half glasses, and he was just so sad and so full of, because Natalie actually lived the shortest amount of time. She only lived 10 months, whereas my mom and Maria lived 2 years after diagnosis. And he knew that, and he knew that at the moment, and I didn't know that he knew that. And then there's a poem called Those Winter Sundays. It's a poem about a young boy who doesn't appreciate his dad getting up every morning and making a fire to chase out the cold, are the words in the poem. And by the end of the poem, he has a better appreciation of his dad and what love really means. And so I sent that poem. To Dr. Haggerty after Natalie died, as a way of saying, I'm sorry I was such a shit before, and I definitely went through this evolution of understanding.
Did he let you know that he got it?
Yes. Yeah. He said, "Oh, I never thought you were brat." I think that's what I said. I think I said brat. Which made me feel better.
Yeah. I know. I mean, Jackie, you're a really nice person. I think even when you've got a little fire, you're a really nice person. Do you, in the last moment or two we have remaining, I know you're a spiritual person. I know that you grew up in a religious family, and I just wonder, do you have a sense of your lost family around you at all?
My grandmother used to say, "They're not gone." They're, in her Sicilian accent, "They're not gone. They're just in the next room." And if you go to Sicily, the first time I went to Sicily, I saw these posters, what looked to me like political posters, because they had pictures and then words in Italian that I didn't understand. But what those were obituaries. And in Sicily, they post them publicly. And so I asked my friends there, I said, "Well, how long do they stay up?" And they say, "Oh, they stay up until the weather takes them." And so I think, and I don't know if it's specifically Sicilian or what it is, but there's this sense that your family is always with you, even though they're not physically here, but they are with you. And I truly believe that, because they have, I've had conversations with my mother and my sister in my dreams, particularly when I needed advice. So, yes, I believe that because love does not die. I believe that love is an energy that continues.
Mm-hmm. Where can people find your work or any, what you've written or more out about you?
Well, currently, probably, if that was the case, would be actually on the Stanford website, and even if they just put my name in, and then on this, the medical school has a blog, and I've written about my work, and then I've written a piece about my sister there. And I haven't been able to focus as much as I would like on more writing and more publication, but that hopefully will be coming in the future.
Yeah, when you don't have all those irons on the fire, you do a lot, and then you're also doing so much because of COVID right now too.
Yes, it's not even it's a marathon sprint, is the way one of the doctors explained it, because even now we are adjusting protocols and just trying to stay up and ahead of everything.
Thank you so much for taking time to share your story with me, and for having this conversation.
Well, thank you, Ronit. And I did want to say the poet's name is Robert Hayden. And
I was going to find it, because I'm going to have to post it.
Yes, Those Winter Sundays. It's a fantastic poem, and it's also fantastic from a literary standpoint. The devices he uses in the poem in terms of sound and repetition, and just from like as a poem itself, but then also the message of the poem are both fantastic.
I look forward to I'm going to post it on my Instagram for the podcast, and I'll also read it and share it because I think people will enjoy reading that.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ronit. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for listening to And Then Everything Changed. For more on this episode, photos, and other episodes you might like, please visit atecpodcast.com. You can connect with me and learn more about episodes on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram also. Just search for my name, Ronit Plank, RONITPLANK, and you will find all the updates. If you like this podcast, please remember to subscribe and also rate and review so other people can find it. Thank you so much for listening.